Good evening and welcome to our Monday, April the 3rd, 2023 council meeting. We're going to jump right into the motion that recommends we go into a closed council meeting held this evening at 6:30 p.m. in accordance with section 239(2)(c) of the Municipal Act 2021 to consider the following: proposed land acquisition, section 239(2)(c), a proposed or pending acquisition or disposition of lands by the municipality or local board. May I please have a mover? Moved by Councillor Dunstall, seconded by Councillor Cressman. All those in favor? And that is carried. We will go into closed and we'll be back here at 7 o'clock for our open meeting. All right, good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us for our council meeting tonight. We're going to jump into item number 2, which is the motion to reconvene in open. The recommendation is that we reconvene in open session at 7:01 p.m. May I please have a mover? Moved by Councillor Dunstall, seconded by Councillor Cressman. All those in favor? And that carries unanimously. Our moment of reflection, actually before I jump into our moment of reflection, I just wanted to acknowledge Councillor Sadhu unfortunately is ill today, so he will not be joining us, but we do, if you are watching, Councillor, we do wish you a speedy recovery. Now, our moment of reflection, April is recognized as Sikh Heritage Month. As we celebrate, let us take a moment to reflect on the social, economic, and cultural contributions of the Sikh community in Wilmot and across the country. Sikhs all around Canada and the world celebrate Viskasa, and also known as Kasala Day, on April 13th, signifying the creation of Kasala and the Sikh Articles of Faith. The teachings of Sikhism, rooted in love, equality, and service to others, have inspired generations to strive for a better world for everyone. As we honor the contributions of the Sikh community, let us also commit to fostering a greater understanding and appreciation for the diversity that enriches our community and our country. Let us come together to celebrate and share in our humanity and work towards a brighter future for all. And on to the territorial land acknowledgement, which I will be reading this evening. We have gathered in Wilmot Township on the traditional territory of the neutral Anishinaabe, Haudenosaunee, and Mississauga peoples. We also want to acknowledge the importance of the Dish with One Spoon Covenant, a peace agreement made between Indigenous nations before the Europeans arrived. It characterizes our collective responsibility to each other and Mother Earth. We should take only what we need, leave enough for others, and keep the dish clean. By acknowledging this covenant and the First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples, we are reminded of our important connection to this land where we live, learn, and work together as a community. Councillors, does anybody have a disclosure of pecuniary interest under the Municipal Conflict of Interest Act? Yes, Councillor Cressman.
Yes, I believe it's, well, I wasn't ready with this, 11.1, is that, or 13.1? Anyhow, the one that deals with Greenwood reconstruction, Walter Fady is mentioned, and that's my son is CEO of that company.
Thank you, and I also have a disclosure to mention, which is for item 13.3. It's the correspondence from Waterloo Oxford District Secondary School. Should that item be discussed tonight, my mother's the principal, so I would have to excuse myself for that. Item 7 is the adoption of the agenda, and the recommendation is that the agenda as presented for April 3rd be adopted. May I please have a mover? Moved by Councillor Cressman, seconded by Councillor Wilkinson. All those in favor? And that carries unanimously. And the recommendation for the minutes of the previous meeting is that the March 14th and March 20th meetings are adopted. May I please have a mover? Moved by Councillor Wilkinson, seconded by Councillor Martin. All those in favor? And that carries unanimously. And we have no public meetings this evening, but we do have presentations, which I believe is what most of you in the audience are here for this evening. And that is our municipal grants to community groups. So I will call up Director of Corporate Services and Treasurer, Patrick Kelly, to join me at the podium. And we will call up each organization. You will walk across from this side, you will receive your check, and then if I could just ask you to stand off to this side for everyone to get their checks, and then we will do a group photo with council after that. So I will just move over to the podium and get started. Thank you. All right. Can you hear me? Okay. Great. Each year, the Township of Wilmot supports the efforts of many community groups and voluntary organizations throughout our municipal grants program. This year, the Finance and Budget Committee recommended grant allocations to 15 initiatives within our community. Tonight, we welcome the grant recipients to Wilmot Council to say thank you for their community involvement and to present their grant funding allocations. So So first off, we have the 2023 Women's Month event. We have Charlotte English accepting the grant check on behalf of the applicant, Sabrina Hallman. And this grant covered fees associated with the Women's Month event. So, good, if you want to come on up here, Charlotte. We also have the New Hamburg Art Tour, and this was to offset costs associated with the annual New Hamburg Arts Tour. Accepting on behalf of the Arts Tour are Barb McLeod and Nancy Taves. And we have the New Hamburg Concert Band. This funding is to offset costs of repairing and maintaining musical instruments, repairs and alterations to uniforms, and purchase of music supplies. Accepting on behalf of the concert band is Rob Murray. We have the Dundee Artisan Festival. This is to support the second annual Dundee Artisan Festival. Accepting on behalf of the Artisan Festival is Shelley Ulmer and Joanne Pohl. We also have the Wilmot Horticultural Society, and this is to support the purchase of plant materials for the public gardens on township property and support the Junior Gardeners Program. Accepting on behalf of the Horticultural Society, we have Yvonne Zim. And now we have the Wilmot Agricultural Society, and this is to offset costs for the 2023 Fall Fair. Accepting on behalf, we have Stephanie Seuss. We also have interfaith community counseling to provide subsidies for low-income individuals and families. And accepting on behalf of ICC is Matthew Isert-Bender. And for the Wilmot Family Resource Center to assist with funding services targeted towards children, youth, and to fund portions of the operational costs of the Indigenous worker located at the Resource Center. Accepting on behalf of the Family Resource Center, we have Tricia Robinson. We also have the Ninth Valley Eco Boosters, and the funding for them is going to help offset costs associated with environmentally focused events. Accepting on behalf of the Eco Boosters, we have Lindsay Dadjic, Julie Yancey, and Tom Kejnovic. We have Waterloo Oxford District Secondary School, and the funding this evening is going to go towards the Waterloo Oxford Citizenship Awards. Accepting on behalf of WO is the principal, Carolyn Salonen. Thanks for coming. We also have, we're running out of room here. We have Community Care Concepts. And the funding we're giving is going to support programs and services offering to seniors and adults with disabilities living within Wilmot Township. On behalf of Community Care Concepts, we have Kathy Arrington. And we have WRPS School Safety Patroller Program. The contributions are going toward the cost of recognizing the dedication of school safety patrollers. Accepting on behalf of WRPS is Catherine Conaboy. And we also have the Wilmot Terry Fox Run, and this funding is going to support marketing costs and other related fundraising costs for the Wilmot Terry Fox Run. Accepting on behalf, we have Clayton Jubb and Lindsay Hareborn. Thank you so much. And we have the Wilmot Seniors Woodworking, and this funding is going to assist the installation of safety devices within the workshop and dust collection system. Accepting on behalf of woodworkers, we have Winston Burrell. Thank you very much for coming. And lastly, we have, I think, the last person in the audience who isn't staff, which is the New Hamburg Firebirds Junior Sea Hockey Club. And this funding is going to help maintain a program of junior hockey excellence. And we have Gord Mills joining us this evening. Great to see you, Gord. So on behalf of council and staff, I would like to thank each of the grant recipients for efforts in making our community better. And we look forward to continuing to be your great supporters. So if I could get everyone, I'm going to move the podium, but come here in an orderly fashion, and we're going to grab council and do a photo. All right, council, we will continue along onto item number 11, which is the consent agenda. Do any councillors have any questions and want to remove an item from the consent agenda? If so, please indicate now, as we will not be taking any questions on consent agenda items unless they are removed and added to the regular agenda. Seeing no questions, the recommendation is that the consent agenda items 11.1, 11.2, and 11.3 be approved. May I please have a mover? Moved by Councillor Martin, seconded by Councillor Dunstall. All those in favor? And that carries. All those opposed? Oh, right, my apologies, that's your conflict. Thank you. All right, and that carries. So on to our reports. We have a recruitment process, which the Director of Community Services, CAO-2023-07. The recommendation is that Council endorse the recruitment process for the Director of Community Services as outlined in this report, and further, that Council appoint a member as Council representative to participate on the Director of Community Services hiring committee. So to get this on the floor, may I please have a mover? Moved by Councillor Martin, seconded by Councillor Cressman. I will now turn it over to CAO Chambers to introduce the report.
Thank you, Mayor, and good evening, Council. In February, Director of Community Services Sandy Jackson announced her retirement, with her last day in the office being on or about May 12th. Congratulations, Sandy. We really appreciate the work that you've done for us during the time that you're here. And we're sad to see you go. However, we have started the process to replace the position. It's a key member of the corporate leadership team, and as such, it's anticipated that targeted recruitment will be required to attract suitable candidates. The townships engaged the services of Waterhouse Executive Search recruitment firm, and the position was posted for applications on March 20th and will close on April 18th. With first round interviews have been tentatively scheduled for April 27th and 28th. The interview team will consist of various members of staff and the recruiter, and staff is also requesting that council appoint one representative to the interview committee this evening.
Thank you very much. So I would now look to council, as we do need to decide on who we're appointing. And Councillor Cressman?
Through you, Mayor, I would move that we appoint Chris Wilkinson as our council representative.
Thank you very much. Is there anybody that would like to appoint anyone else or make any other suggestions? I think just for those of watching that aren't aware, we're fortunate that Councillor Wilkinson is in fact a headhunter when he is not a council member. So I would also think that he would have the right skill set to really represent us and know what to look for in an interview. I will also be supporting that, but all of those in favor then? Okay, great. And so, Councillor Wilkinson, then you are going to be appointed, and we will now call the vote. Now that we have your name on the recommendation, we will call the vote for the recommendation to be passed as approved with Councillor Wilkinson. All those in favor? And that carries unanimously. On to report 12.2, the recommendation is that staff be directed to investigate utilization opportunities for the township-owned gravel pit facility at 1768 Huron Road, and further, that if feasible, staff be directed to issue an expression of interest for further use opportunities at the pit facility. To get this on the floor, may I please have a mover? Moved by Councillor Martin, seconded by Councillor Dunstall. And I will now call on our Director of Infrastructure Services, Jeff Mollenhuis, to introduce the report, please.
Thank you, Mayor. This report is an operational summary for the existing municipal gravel pit. The report outlines historic and recent activities at the site. The license for the facility allows for extraction of up to 70,000 tons annually of material, which the township has historically only utilized for roughly 5,000 per year. And those materials that were extracted and used were typically used on maintenance projects like gravel program and that type of activity. The site currently sits with a low utilization. Recently, the price of aggregate has made it more feasible for us to source out material from local pits rather than to take on the administrative burden of managing the activity at our site. So we have undertaken that the last couple of years. And so with that burden of managing the site itself and the licensing and all the other things that come with it, we are at the point where we're reporting back to council and looking for potential opportunities for this site. So this report seeks direction on exploring some of those opportunities to utilize the site further. Right now, as outlined in the report, there are a few options there, and it could be for something like a disposition of land, or it could be a lease framework or a partnership framework with a gravel supplier in the area. And at this point, staff are recommending that we pursue those a little bit further and investigate, and if feasible, that an expression of interest be released so that it could be sort of a bid opportunity or something to that effect, and then we would report back to council at that time. I'd be happy to answer any questions at this point.
Thank you very much, Director Mollenhuis. Questions, councillors? Councillor Cressman.
Through you, Mayor, I guess the question twofold is with potential changes in assessment of gravel, are we going to see the opportunity to continue to purchase gravel at better prices from other pits? So that would be question number one. And the caveat to that would be, does it, until that is settled, would determining what a viable alternative, should we be waiting for that to be the dust, so to speak, the dust to settle on that before we make a decision on disposing, etc.
Through you, Mayor, when we look at the cost of gravel and the cost for us to produce gravel through our pit, the last few years we've been pretty close to even. If not, we've been more expensive to produce. That is even without considering, considering some of our own time and equipment involvement as well. So there are those pieces that we've already taken into consideration. What I would suggest at this point is we're keeping an eye on the market, and at this point this year we're proceeding with the plans that were in place the last few years, and looking to purchase the prices that we've seen so far, and we expect to still see something very similar for what the volume that we tend to need. But that would be something that when we look at an expression of interest and sort of next steps that we would consider and certainly report back on any of those types of trends that might impact that.
Councillor Martin.
Through you, Mayor Salonen, I have a question about remediation, and I guess my question is kind of trying to think out loud and think through some of the implications, because we have discussed in previous meetings on other topics that when other people own the pits, remediation is not something that the township has jurisdiction over. But in this case, as the owner of the pit, we would have some jurisdiction, and so I'm curious if it would be something to consider to think about remediation and what the implications would be and what the costs would be. The needs that we have in terms of gravel, can we use recycled gravel, for example, which apparently can't be used if you're building a high structure, but the work that we're doing and the needs that we have would be different maybe than when times are needed for virgin gravel. So I'm just raising the question. I'm not sure how to move forward on it, but I'm curious about remediation.
Through you, Mayor, our pit license does require remediation. I would say the volume of what we extract is not excessive, so our remediation burden at this point isn't excessive as well. But that being said, there is still the requirement for remediation. Remediation does sit, we'll say, in terms of the property, it does sit as a liability that does need to be addressed. And I think there's some other pieces now with PSAB legislation that also speaks to that, the remediation component. So yes, it is something that would be required for the property. What I would sort of look at is, I guess, in terms of disposition or expression of interest, we would look to try to reduce some of that liability for the township's perspective, and maybe look at a business opportunity there to address that through any sort of relationship or sale that moves forward. But again, those need to be sort of explored in more detail. But to answer your question on the remediation component, yes, there is a requirement to remediate the site.
Great. Any additional questions, councillors? No. Okay. Seeing none, then we will call the vote on this. All those in favor? And that carries unanimously. So item 12.3, before I read the recommendation, I just want to note that the community players did send in correspondence, which will be added to this evening's minutes of this meeting, as well as they have been circulated to councillors. With that out of the way, the recommendation is that report CS 2023-04 be received for information purposes. To get this on the floor, may I please have a mover? Moved by Councillor Dunstall, seconded by Councillor Wilkinson, and I'll now call on Director of Community Services, Sandy Jackson, to reduce her report.
Thank you, Mayor Salonen. So this report outlines the estimated operating and capital costs associated with the New Hamburg Community Centre returning to operation as an ice pad, and it also includes consideration for a synthetic product called Glice as requested by Council. I apologize for my voice, I'm at the end of some bronchitis. Looking at the costs associated with operating the building as an arena, staff is estimating an increase in net budget impact of about $210,000 to $300,000 per year to return the building to an ice surface. These numbers have not been verified, however, they are based on an anticipated increase in utilities, building expenses, and staffing, and reflect a similar revenue level as was recently reported in the Wellesley report. As a result, this would impact the tax levy approximately 2 to 3%. From a capital perspective, the refrigeration plant and in-floor brine system were decommissioned 15 years ago when the WRC opened, and they would require full replacement. The spectator seating would require replacement as it no longer meets building code. The former dressing rooms, which were very tiny, to say the least, have all been decommissioned and would require a building expansion to construct 6 new dressing rooms, which is the standard for a single pad, and a number of other mechanical units would also require replacement. The high-level estimate for required capital is about $8 million as a result. In addition, in 2022, the Township received $4.2 million in funding through the Investing in Canada Infrastructure Program, and that was in the Community Culture and Recreation stream, and that was identified to renovate the New Hamburg Community Centre as a space to use for modernizing and a hybrid facility to accommodate warm floor multi-purpose use and support local arts community through provision of space for the performing arts. Staff were directed in 2022 to work with TCP to develop an anchor tenancy agreement with the community players, which aligns with the grant funding. TCP have pledged $250,000 towards this renovation to ensure they have the space needed to support their performances and rehearsals. Included in this renovation is a building addition to accommodate storage and staging space for TCP. If this building were reinstated as an ICE facility, it is staff's opinion that there would not be room for the addition for performance and rehearsal space, as well as the required dressing rooms that are required due to the site constraints at this location. As a result of the implications for local theatre and the high cost to return this 75-year-old building back to an ice surface, staff are not recommending this be pursued further. Staff were also asked to review a product called Glice, which is a synthetic surface used for skating that does not require refrigeration. Staff researched the product and surveyed the 4 main user groups, ICE user groups, and all groups indicated that this is not a surface that is suitable to their needs and that natural ice is required to address their ice shortage. As a result, staff are not recommending further exploration of this product as well. With the options that have been explored to date, staff are recommending further addressing the ice needs and other recreation facility needs through public consultation as part of the 2024 Parks and Recreation Master Plan update as per the 10-year capital. This will provide an opportunity to ensure all residents have a voice regarding the needs and priorities with respect to all aspects of recreation facility needs. And I'm happy to answer any questions council may have.
Thank you very much, Director Jackson. Councillor Dunstall.
Thank you. Through you, Mayor. Director Jackson, I just want to double check. You had mentioned about the seating not being able to, or it would be very expensive. And did I read that part of the grant, that $4 million, was going to go to address seating in the facility? So that would take care of at least that piece, or is that not correct?
Through the Mayor, that is, the removal of the seating is part of that funding. We haven't really addressed what would be done in place of it with respect to spectator. It wouldn't be used, that type of seating wouldn't be used for theater performances. They would bring in their own seating for that. So there really isn't a plan at this point until the design is done as to what will happen within that seating space.
Thank you. A follow-up. So you're recommending going back to public and getting more information for the 2024. So when do you anticipate this process would begin?
Through the Mayor, obviously that'll be up to the new director. But once council approves the capital budget for next year, it would be my expectation that that would be something that could be initiated relatively quickly with respect to hiring a consultant to review that master plan and the Trails master plan, which are both scheduled for next year.
Thank you.
Councillor Cressman.
Yes, through you, Mayor. I'm just curious in terms of being an anchor tenant, what that means vis-a-vis the Agriculture Society, which makes use of the building as well, whether that is compatible with their use, etc., because they have had a long-standing relationship in use of that facility.
Through the Mayor, excellent question, Councillor. All of the anchor events, call them that, would be worked around with respect to the anchor tenancy, and that would also include some of the township's own events and activities that we run there, because we do have regular rentals and we have skateboarding for kids and ball hockey and things. So the times, and that's really essentially what we do now with TCP. When they're doing their events, we block out timelines that work effectively, and TCP is fantastic to work with as far as cooperating with the community's needs as well.
Any additional questions, councillors? Councillor Martin.
Through you, Mayor Salonen, I just wanted to acknowledge the letter that we did receive from the TCP community players, and I think they're a great group to have there, and so I'm happy to see your recommendation, Director Jackson. I think from my point of view, I agree with the things that you're saying in that report. It makes a lot of sense. And if anybody heard me say a few weeks ago that I don't want to tear down old buildings, I agree with Mayor Salonen, and I'm certainly in favor of keeping this building, and I like to see the TCP using the space.
Great. Councillor Wilkinson.
Through you, Mayor, just thank you for preparing this report. This is the kind of information that we're looking for in terms of adding it to the never-ending list of items to consider with related to ice times. So thank you. But one of the questions, I know you've stated your opinion or staff in general is that it's likely not to coexist with the potential anchor tenancy here. So I'm just curious, is there an exploratory conversation or a conversation to be had with regards to the grant that could potentially support both? Is that a possibility?
Well, through the Mayor, I'd probably rely on Director Kelly to speak to the terms of the grant, but they have been, they have sent us our agreement, I believe, so maybe Patrick.
Sure. Through you, Mayor Salonen. So I guess the original application, first time around, would have contemplated ice as a other use in the facility. Once that changed based on some of the feedback through the planning consultants, we were asked to explore updating the application to remove the ice components to still fit within the program. So that's a significant change in scope already with this grant funding program. As with other ones, multiple changes in scope aren't generally what the funding agencies are looking for, and we've kind of solidified through the transfer payment agreement that this would not include the ice components, and as Director Jackson mentioned, it does include the additional space outside for storage. So essentially we would have to go back to the ministry once again if we wanted to consider a change in scope, but changing the scope frequently again is something the ministry has to go up through their approvals, and not guaranteed that they would support that.
Also, I would personally err on the side of caution of rechanging the scope in terms of long-term when we're looking for more funding and more grant programs from governments. I would say it's usually noted at those levels if you're easy to work with or not. So I personally wouldn't want to jeopardize this opportunity for TCP and that building where they're headed on going. But Councillor Dunstall, did you have anything? No? Okay. Any other questions then, councillors? Oh, Councillor Dunstall.
Sorry, thank you. This question had come up before, and I'm not sure it was ever answered. When booking ice times, do we give precedence to, or priority to Wilmot participants, Wilmot organizations?
Through the mayor, yes, we absolutely do. And each group, our allocation policy that we follow provides approximately 80% of the ice to youth organizations intentionally, and that's a pretty standard approach for most municipalities where possible. We do have some out-of-town ice rentals. Most of them are adult groups. However, I would state that from what I have heard anecdotally, I have not gone in and checked their addresses. The majority of the people who utilize those ice times are local folks. It just happens to be somebody from out of town who has the contract in their name. So that's my understanding, and that was through some of the research that my staff did when this question came up before. When ice becomes available, which is rare, it is always something that we work with our local groups first to ensure that they have first dibs. We also meet with our ice user group minimum of once a year, often twice a year, and between the groups they'll work together to sort out ice times that work better for each organization, and they're a very collaborative group with respect to how they manage the ice in general.
Thank you.
And I just want to say to the ICE user groups, as I'm sure you'll be watching this certainly portion of our meeting, by no means does receiving this as information where the recommendation is not to continue, does this mean that we don't want to see a third ice pad. It just means that we're going to continue to look at other options, and some of which I think myself and other councillors have talked with you about opportunity and how we're going to make this work for our community and our ice users as well as the larger community on a whole. So just if you are watching, please don't be alarmed that this means that we aren't still looking at other ways to ensure that you have the ice time that you need. Do councillors have any other questions? All right, seeing none, we will now call the vote, which is to receive this report for information. All those in favor? And that carries unanimously. On to correspondence. So we had 3 correspondence items in the actual agenda. Then we had the addition of the TCP, which will be added onto the minutes, as well as we did have another correspondence this afternoon, which I will mention in relation to the notice of motion. Does anybody have anything that they would like to make comment on or pull out? Councillor Wilkinson?
Yeah, through you, Mayor, I'd like to pull out correspondence 13.3.
One quick thing then, if you're going to do that, I have to excuse myself because that's my conflict, and I'm going to pass it over to the clerk on how we do that.
Great. So this evening, Councillor Wilkinson, you are acting mayor. So if you want to take over as chair, you can do that.
That was convenient, I guess. So in essence, through myself, I'm pulling this out, and I'd like to table it for debate. I think there's a conversation to be had around this. So am I able to table this and have a seconder, or will I require...
You require another member of council to move any motion that you'd like to move.
Thank you. Excellent. So seconded by Councillor Martin.
I'm sorry, so it was moved by Councillor Martin, seconded by Councillor Dunstall, is that right?
Oh, yes. All right, well, I'll get the topic started here. I mean, reading through this, I did actually specifically reach out to the principal of Waterloo Oxford and got a better understanding of what the ask is here. So wouldn't mind just posing a brief question to Director Jackson with regards to the costs associated with this and what we might be looking at. I know in the past, just to sort of set the precedence, this event has been subsidized completely. Costs have maybe gone up, and they're requesting that we re-examine that. So I would like to do so this evening, if we could, please.
Certainly, through the mayor, this event was a relatively small event historically. It has grown quite significantly over the years, which is great. It's a wonderful event for the community. It is a run through Schmidt Woods behind the Wilmot Recreation Complex, for those of you who don't have the correspondence in front of you. The cost for this year, because it falls under a special event, it's subject to the $500 special event fee that was implemented recently. So that's the reason for the change from historical to current. It does take staff time to organize and take care of the event. So it's a typical special event fee that we would charge for any other event similar in nature.
Are there any other questions? Councillor Dunstall.
Through you, Mayor Wilkinson. I was just wondering, I believe that previous events have been grandfathered so that they don't have to pay that fee. As this was something that happened before, would this not fall under that?
Through the mayor, there were a number of events that were grandfathered. They were the more significant, larger events. Not all of the events that have ever been held within the township were grandfathered. There are going to be some of these that come up over the course of the year that we would treat as a typical special event unless otherwise directed by council.
Thank you.
Councillor Martin.
Through you, Mayor, if we were going to agree to this, to the terms of the letter, or if we were going to grant access without a fee, that would be $500 then in terms of our budget. Am I understanding that correctly?
Yes, through you, Acting Mayor Wilkinson, to Councillor Martin. Yeah, it would be, we would need, and that would go through the clerk probably, we would probably want a motion indicating that your council is approving the waiving of those fees and accepting the expense under the council special events budget for the waiving of those fees. So just so councillors are aware, your special events budget for the year is $4,400 in total. So each of these, if they were to come up, is going to be over and above what you had put in your budget for already assumed special events that council participates in or hosts.
Are there any other questions?
Yes, I read this through too and wasn't aware exactly what the cost and the implication is to the township. I understand it better now after our discussion. Understand as well that we would set a precedent, and that's always a challenge. But at the same token, I think anything we can do to keep our youth engaged and active and physically active, plus keep them off the streets, so to speak, in different shape or form, I would be voting in favor of waiving it.
Councillor Martin.
So in terms of process, through you, Mayor, we would need a motion that would say we're waiving the fees for this group, and that would affect our budget by $500.
Councillor Cressman.
I would so move.
I would second it.
Okay. Okay, so forgive me if I don't have the wording exactly correct, but I believe we need to vote on getting the motion on the floor, and then once on the floor, we can vote to approve if that is the case.
Through your Acting Mayor, the motion is on the floor already, so you can go ahead and debate that motion, and then following the debate, you can go ahead and vote.
Okay. Are there any remaining questions regarding this? No? Okay, so let's call a vote. All in favor? And that passes unanimously. I will relinquish control back to the rightful mayor.
Thank you. Very well done, Councillor. That is great. So moving on to item number 14 now, which is bylaws, and the recommendation is that the bylaws as attached to this agenda be read a first, second, and third time, and finally passed in open council. The particular bylaw tonight is the one that we already dealt with, the bylaw to prohibit the sale and use of firecrackers and to regulate sales and use of fireworks in the Township of Wilmot. So to get this on the floor, may I please have a mover? Moved by Councillor Dunstall. Councillor Martin, did you have a question?
I had a question about process. I wasn't sure
Certainly.
if we finished with number 13. Do we have to say anything further, or we just accepted the correspondence?
No, the correspondence, so we don't actually have to accept correspondence. I've just been asking if we have questions, because the last 3 meetings we have had questions, so, but no, there is no formal process that we need to accept. It's there and we all have to read it, so. Back to a seconder for this bylaw. Seconded by Councillor Cressman. And any questions before we vote? All right, all those in favor? And that passes unanimously. Now, we do have a notice of motion this evening. Before we jump into Councillor Dunstall explaining that, I did want to note that this afternoon we received correspondence from Mary Pavey, and it is regarding this notice of motion, and it will be added to the minutes for tonight's meeting, as it does relate to this topic, and all of Council has received that correspondence. So the notice of motion to consider this evening, I will call on our Deputy Clerk to display, which I believe he already has. And it is concerning land acknowledgements. I will read Councillor Dunstall's notice and we'll get it on the floor, and then I will pass it over to you, Councillor Dunstall. So the notice is, whereas the Township is committed to continuous improvement and recognizing the relationship of the Indigenous territory/territories of where Council meets, therefore, be it resolved that staff be directed to report back to Council on ways to enhance, personalize, and make meaningful the land acknowledgement statement. Recommendation, whereas the Township is committed, my apologies, I am just rereading what I had there. So to get this on the floor, Councillor Dunstall has already moved it. Do we have a seconder? Seconded by Councillor Cressman. And I will now turn it over to Councillor Dunstall to speak to your motion.
Thank you. Through you, Mayor. I was born in Saint-Antoine, Nouveau-Brunswick, and like most Acadians, my lineage includes Indigenous roots. My grandmother, my father's mother, was part Micmac from Cape Breton and Nova Scotia. I have many family relatives who have embraced their Indigenous heritage, and I was talking to a cousin of mine, and she relayed to me that she and her friends found the land acknowledgement to be, her words were, gratuitous and performative. That bothered me, and so I did some research. And I found that there are actually many examples of Indigenous who do not like the land acknowledgement. In an October 2021 CBC article, 5 Nations people weighed in with their thoughts, advice, and expectations. Taltalia Michelle Nahani is Squamish from Eustlan in BC and is a leader in cultural safety training. She offers workshops on how to give territorial acknowledgements. She states, land acknowledgements should not be copied, pasted, and read statements, but rather meaningful personal commitments. Also, Hayden King, who's the executive director of the Yellowhead Institute, a First Nation-led research center based out of Ryerson University, who is Anishinaabe from Beausoleil First Nation in Ontario. He actually helped write the Ryerson University land acknowledgement in 2012, and it's something he said he now regrets. King said some of the problems he sees is that land acknowledgements are simply inaccurate, include the same nation multiple times under different terms, or misinterpret treaty concepts, such as the dish with one spoon, into a metaphor of a multicultural utopia. I agree with these statements, and I think that the land acknowledgements should not be something that is just read from someone else's words, that it should be something personal, which is why I've brought it to the floor. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Dunstall. Are there any other questions or comments, Council? Councillor Cressman?
Yes, through you, Mayor. I'm just wondering, Councillor Dunstall, after having read the letter, the correspondence we read, or we received this afternoon, whether you would have any comments in terms of process there or at all or not.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes, I read that as well, and I certainly would like to work with Township to get a group together, which would certainly include local Indigenous and other groups that would want to participate. So yes, yeah, I agree.
Councillor Martin, did you have a question?
I guess my question and comment would be alongside of that. I think if we're moving in this direction, I think it would be good to include a community group like the Ecumenical Working Group on Indigenous Relations. And I believe Marie Pavey, who wrote the letter to us this afternoon, is a member of that group. I do appreciate, Councillor Dunstall, you bringing forward this motion. My concern would be I would not want us to get into a position where we don't have a land acknowledgement, or if we make it personal, will all of us do our research in terms of making it more accurate than the current land acknowledgement that we have? And so I would, hope that we don't move in a direction that turns it into something that it has less meaning than the meaning that is there. Because personally, I do like the fact that we have a land acknowledgement, though I certainly agree it doesn't seem to change many of our actions in terms of moving forward. The Vatican on Thursday came forward saying that they're repudiating the doctrine of discovery, which I think is, in my opinion, wonderful. So I think there's a lot of movement. If we can find a way of making the land acknowledgement more meaningful, I'm in favor. But my question would be, can we do this in a way? I wouldn't want to put pressure on staff to say that staff should come back with recommendations. I would rather see some combined effort between council and staff. And I don't know if we could then change the motion into something different so that it's not only putting the responsibility on staff, but those are some of my thoughts.
Through you, Mayor. My understanding is, and correct me if I'm wrong, that we're instructing Township to actually do an investigation, which I believe would include in that process varying groups that would be interested in helping in that. I would just like to confirm that with the clerk.
Through you, Mayor. Yes, I think the notice of motion is directing staff to bring back a report, and so that report would come back talking about best practices that we would recommend to council.
Perfect, thank you.
So I guess then, Councillor Martin, to address your point, staff would just be bringing the report, and then we would have our regular discussion and come to whether we agree with what the recommendation is as presented at that time, or if there is additional input that we want. And I would imagine we could still also independently chat to staff about how that report's coming forward and understand what's going in it. Of course, if you have anything that you would like in particular to be seen, I think now would probably be an appropriate time to let staff know, and they could hopefully take that in their direction as they come up with a report should this motion pass. If that makes sense on your end? Yep. Okay.
Well, I guess through you, Mayor Salonen, I mean, my one question is it really fair to staff? Because it's such a complex question. I mean, across the country and around the world, people are struggling with how to do meaningful land acknowledgements. And so to come, ask staff to come back with something that, in such a complex topic, I think our staff are very smart, intelligent, and, can certainly bring many meaningful recommendations back to us. But that would be my worry, is putting too much responsibility on them. But I would recommend using the groups we have, the Ecumenical Working Group, the seeing if Crow Shield Lodge would like to participate, Elder Nina from the Wilmot Family Resource Center, maybe putting out a question asking if people would like to join a working group. Yeah, those are some thoughts I have.
Through you, Mary. Yes, it's certainly appropriate to direct staff to come back with a report on best practices. I think, Councillor Dunstall, you've done some research. We're always happy to have conversations with council regarding, your thoughts and feelings around the issue as well. In advance of coming forward with a report, we're happy to have those conversations with you. But we do recognize that it will be a collaborative effort, not just staff formulating the land acknowledgement. It will be more reporting back on a recommended process based on our research.
Councillor Martin.
Through you, Mayor Salonen, will this, in terms of moving forward, so as we wait on staff to come back with recommendations, will we continue with the current land acknowledgement as it is?
Yes, we will. Our procedural bylaw also has it in place beyond, I agree, I personally like having one, but our procedural bylaw has, as it stands, that we are to do the land acknowledgement as approved by council. So until a time, should this council come up with a new one or a process in which you could add personalization to one, we would remain with this one until a further decision is made. Any additional questions on this motion, councillors? Councillor Wilkinson.
Through you, Mayor, just a comment. I think this is good, healthy debate, and bringing in the correspondence from this afternoon. I certainly walking away from this saying, okay, maybe there's an opportunity here to have a more in-depth conversation. I think that's the spirit of what's being asked here, is present a report to potentially pursue a group meeting or a meeting to think this through in a different manner, which I think is the ideal outcome here. So with that said, and I think part of it too is there's certainly another looming question that I know will be coming down as well, and potentially, we look to attach this to that. So look forward to, if it passes, seeing the report and then looking at what next steps could look like.
Any final questions or comments, councillors? All right, seeing none, I will now call the vote. All those in favor? And that carries unanimously. On to announcements. Councillors, does anybody have announcements? Councillor Dunstall.
Thank you. Through you, Mayor. This Saturday, April 8th, the New Hamburg Optimist is having their annual Easter egg hunt. It starts at noon. There will be magician, there will be face painting, and I believe Eric Clapman is there, as well as some goodie bags. So if you can make it, it starts at 12 on Saturday at the old arena.
That's wonderful. I'd also like to point out that that is open to everyone. It is not by denomination or
Absolutely.
religious association. So it's a great event just to go out with your family, and if you like hunting for candy, it's a fun opportunity for kids. And I believe the Wilmot Ag Society is also there with their petting zoo. So hopefully the weather should be good for that. On that, to anyone who is celebrating, happy Easter coming up. And beyond that, does anybody else have any other announcements to make? Nope. All right. Seeing none, we did not have any business arising from closed, and the recommendation for the confirmatory bylaw is that as attached to this agenda be read a first, second, and third time and finally passed in open council. May I please have a mover? Moved by Councillor Dunstall, seconded by Councillor Cressman. All those in favor? That carries unanimously. And now on to adjournment. May I please have a mover? Moved by Councillor Martin, seconded by Councillor Cressman. All those in favor? And we are adjourned.